Alright, let's start with the Discourse of Me. I'm Lydia Kieser, and let's start with the Discourse of my family. So this is my lovely family. It's my dad, my mom, me, my husband, my younger sister, and my older brother. We are a family of 5, but my husband Luke just married in, so now we are a happy family of 6, and we live in a small town in central Illinois. We've lived here my whole life, same house and everything, so a little bit about my family. We are a very close family. We just grew up doing everything together. We don't really argue very much. We are just pretty peaceful family. So because of that, one of the biggest goals of our communication is to maintain that close connection. Even though some of us have moved away, my brother lives in a different house in Roanoke, which is the town that my family lives in, and my husband and I live in a completely different town. We still have to use communication to stay connected and to stay close. And we also communicate in order to support each other, whether it be listening or just actively helping. We have those methods of communication as well for our goals. So a couple ways that we stay connected is we have a group chat, a texting group chat that we use. And we also just talk around the dinner table all the time. Like, this is probably our biggest method of communicating. As of now, we all live close enough that we get together on Sunday nights and we all sit around the table and we eat a great meal that my mom makes. We talk about how our jobs are going. My sister just got a dog that she's been begging about, so we talk about that. We're redoing our house right now, so we talk about the next steps to that, how class is going, sports that Maggie's in, what mom cooked for the week, just our weekly plans coming up, just things like that. Just very open communication, trying to connect each other and remain connected, even though we are apart. So in our family, my parents are our authority, but when we speak to each other, it's very open and free. There's not really one person that dominates over the other. My brother is more quiet, but when he does speak, it's great. And we do have a lot of fun with our communication. We hand gesture all the time, and we use facial expressions to just answer people. Like, my brother has this look on his face that just is like, okay, you're stupid, stop talking. And we just know that it's just funny and it's not offensive at all. But we tease my little sister about not capitalizing the first letter of her sentences, and just little things like that, where our communication is very informal and pretty normal to family talk, I would say. We don't have hardly any jargon or specific vocabulary that we use, and I guess my husband can attest that it is easy enough to come into and communicate and not feel left out because he just married in. Another major discourse of my life is church. So this is my church. It's the Roanoke Apostolic Christian Church. So it's, as you can see, it's pretty big. But I've gone here all my life, and it's a very important part of who I am today. So a little bit about my church. The goal of our church is to worship God and also to fellowship together. So we have a very close congregation who know a lot about each other's lives. So our purpose is to come and worship God, but also to come and kindle relationships that are lasting lifetimes. So because of this, of our goal, our Bible is our main source of authority, but we have formal media and informal. So formal would be like the Bible, and we do sing out of hymn books. Our church announcements, the language in those are very just precise, complete sentences, very informal, and as well as the prayer chain that goes through email. Those are all very formal, either spoken or written words. Informal would be more like connecting on Facebook or texting or sending letters to each other. We also have church lunch. So we have a service in the morning, and then we have lunch in the afternoon, and then we have another service after lunch. So this creates a very informal conversation that really helps shape our relationships together. So the second, going with that, is the people of our church are very supportive of one another. They're intentional with their conversations, whether it be a phone call during the middle of the week or getting to somebody at that lunchtime. So when someone's not participating in the language, it just seems very odd that something is wrong with them, or just going on in their life, or they don't feel welcome or something like that. So their participation is very telling of how they feel in the church. And also the ministers are the experts in our church, but also the lay people have that responsibility to do their own personal study, to have that personal walk with God. But when we come together, the authority and most of the communication whole group is done by the ministers. Third is the language of our church. So obviously we are talking religious words and hymns that aren't familiar to people who weren't raised or who don't have background information of the Bible. So some examples are righteousness, repentance, sanctification, holy, congregation. We call each other brother and sister because we are one family in Christ. Some other words that people might not know are different books of the Bible. And that is kind of a goal of the church then, is to explain that language to people who are coming in. Some other maybe special things about church language is the Bible is written in different translations. So we use the King James, which is kind of more archaic and poetic, but it can also be harder to explain or understand. But there are also different kind of translations that have different discourses themselves for different audiences. If specifically, like if you're going to study it or if you're new to the whole thing. But Paul does write in very long sentences. So that is something unique to that. And a symbol that we all have is the cross. Everybody knows what the cross means of Jesus' crucifixion. So fourth is our tradition. Our church is very tradition oriented. So we wear really nice clothes to church. The women cover our heads as respect to the men. We sit segregated, so the men sit on one side and the women sit on the other, just to show that we are a family and that everyone is equal. And we do sing out of hymn books. So here's an example of a hymn that we sing, which shows just kind of some language that you might not be familiar with if you're not in this kind of context. Like, where is Zion? Where is that going? Accord, sweet accord here. That's one that it's just not very common. But yeah, so we all sing, and the sopranos sing the top note, the altos sing the middle note, the tenors sing this top note here, and the bass sing this note. So you kind of just choose whatever one you want. So this would be another way where people would feel either included or excluded, whether they know how to sing. But it's just kind of natural to the people who just grew up here. So that is my church, and that is a very important discourse in my life. My third discourse that I am pretty involved in is school. Obviously, it takes up a very large part of my life right now, and I love it. But I've kind of noticed that there are different categories of discourse in school. So school in itself is a discourse. And then in that discourse, there are kind of sub-discourses, if you will. And I also noticed that these discourses have changed via being in person or being online. So in person, I felt like it was more natural to communicate, and participation was more natural because you were in class, you were talking to other people, language was freely flowing, and the language didn't really change when it went online, but now there's just like these new norms and terms, like facial expressions are much more important, and hand gestures are showing that you're listening and your screen's on, and just acknowledging that your speaker or looking in the screen and or looking in the camera when you're talking, things like that. There's just more necessary parts of language that weren't required necessarily when you were in person, but now that we are online, they're much more valuable. And there's kind of some new words like Zoom and breakout rooms and screen sharing and all these new little terms that we didn't have when we were in person learning. But for the most part, I feel like my school discourse is separated between math and English language arts, and between these two subjects, I think that the discourses are different enough to kind of separate them. And I have more classes than these, but I'm just going to separate these for now. But I feel like math is more content-based. Like, the goal in education in general is to prepare us pre-service teachers for the future and equip us with tools and knowledge to help students become experts in the areas we're teaching them. So while the traditional view of teachers is that the teachers are the experts in the room, really the main goal of education is to make the students the experts. So in math, it's very important to do this, that you know more content than the student, not so you're the expert, so that you can explain to the student how this math concept works or another way to do it so that they can wrap their minds around it as well. So the formality of math is like lectures and assessments and presentations were pretty formal in our math classes, but we had a lot of informal class discussions, and number talks are a concept we do in math, and those are really informal. One of our professors, Dr. Clements, just told stories for many minutes during class period, so those were very informal as well. But our genres in math are pretty much like Euclidean proofs were big in geometry, and Dr. Clements also gave us handouts every single class period for what we were going to do that day. And number talks are another kind of genre that I'll talk about a little bit later. But some words that are specific to math are number sense and holistic reasoning, and I just feel like math in general is very terminology driven. All of the mathematical symbols are a good example of that. But number talks are also a very important part of math. And when you think of math, you don't really think of language and text and communicating ideas, but number talks are centered around that. And so a teacher goes to the front of the room and she puts a multiplication problem on the board, and students have to internalize it and think about it in their heads how they would do it, and then they have to explain to the teacher who writes on the board step by step of what they did. And so the point of this is to show that you can communicate your thoughts clearly and that you know the content and all of that. So that is actually a very language-driven part of math. But moving on to ELA, ELA is all about discourse and viewing the world through different lenses and absorbing information through the text. So the power of the text and power of language is very prevalent in English language arts. And I've noticed that in a lot of our ELA classes, it hasn't been as formal as I would have expected, but the informality actually increases relatability to content, participation, just kind of saturating our minds with it through very informal ways like slacking and just class discussions. Our projects are very informal, and I'm making a video right now, and it doesn't matter how you do it and whatever you want to do, just kind of gives students a lot of freedom with their language. I have felt like that way, at least for our classes. Participation in class shows understanding, but it doesn't always. Just because a student isn't participating doesn't mean they're not listening, and that goes for math as well. But in ELA, a lot of the genres that we have worked with are just different texts, videos, other people in our classroom. We use Slack to communicate, and I've noticed as well, just with my personal language in ELA, that when I'm asking questions, I become much more introspective and processing through my questions a lot more than just blurbing something and then forgetting about it a little bit later. So school has really impacted my life the most thus far, just because I've been in it the longest, but so it's a very important discourse of my life as well. The fourth discourse I'd like to talk about are my friends, and these are my three best friends. There's Rachel right here, Abby, and Mindy. We've known each other basically our entire lives, but really became friends in the last 5 to 7-ish years. But they are like my second family, and so I thought I would talk about how our discourse is unique to others. So in these 3 areas, so the first one is our goal. It's kind of like my family actually, is to stay connected to each other and to support one another as friends do. We are all in very different stages of life. 2 of us are married, 1 is engaged, 1 is working, and so we have just different stages of life. 1 has a baby. I mean, it's just been crazy. Lots of change recently. But it has really helped us stay connected, and our language has to be very intentional in order for us to remain close and to support one another. And we do this through communicating face-to-face when we can. We also text message, just hey, how are you doing? We video message. We've done Marco Polos and group conversations and that kind of thing. So it just kind of depends what we have to talk about as to how we will communicate. If it's just a quick question, we'll just text, or if it's a random hey, how are you, we'll just text. But if it's a deeper question or want to actually catch up but we can't talk face to face, then we'll meet in person. And I've actually noticed that the style of communication that each person has in our friend group tells a lot about them. So Abby, which was the girl in the middle, she uses tons of exclamation points, and that's just very much her personality. She's just very bubbly and going all the time. And Rachel was the one on the left. She's very particular about correct punctuation and grammar, and she doesn't use very many emojis because she is a very particular person. She's an accountant. She likes things precise and orderly. And then my friend Mindy, which is on the right, she uses lots and lots of emojis because she's just very expressive that way. So it's been cool to see, like, our discourse is very much centered around our personalities. And when we do talk, it's pretty much in short sentences, but in a very conversational way. But our shared experiences are definitely the content of our communication and conversations, because they link us together. And so we talk about, like, oh, how was that last week? Or, hey, do you remember when we did this? Or that kind of thing. So that would perhaps exclude others from our conversations, but I do think that there's a lot of value in being in a close community, that you have your own discourse so that you can properly communicate with each other. So thanks for listening to me process through my discourses, and I hope that you as well can figure out kind of where you fit and where language fits into your life, and just realize the power that we all do have in our words.